Soje Shanti Compound Show. Okay, let's do the 4 limitless contemplations, something all of you should do at home. It's really a very important prayer with everything that we need for Buddhist practice. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness which can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal, impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Sengchen Je Dewatang Dewe Jutang Denpa Juchik, Dungal Tang, Dungal Chichutang Drawa Juchik, Dungal Mepe Dewa Tampatang Mindrawa Juchik, Nering Chaktang Nitang Drawe Tangnum Chempolane Pajuchik. So good evening, everybody. For those that I haven't seen yet, it's lovely to see all of you. And Lee, I think you can just take, because lots of people have never seen our center. So I think you can take us a little tour around the center of the beautiful things on the wall. And we're getting the most beautiful new one. Someone's painting for me in Nepal, but Nepal's in dire straits at the moment. So I don't know when we're going to get it. But she just painted the most beautiful, beautiful painting for our center. And I might swipe it, Lee, until we come back. So show everybody. Go. Should I make you a co-host? Sorry, Lee. Okay. Should I make you a co-host, Lee, so you can talk?
There we go. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, now I don't have to be a co-host, but yeah, we're inside our shop here. And there's books. There's also a library. And the reception desk, and then walking into the shrine room. And yeah, just starting on the left. Can't really see where I am. Okay, there we go. And lots of beautiful pieces here. Tankas, Guru Rinpoche, Tai Situ. Here's our Bardo boards. Kamapa, Akon Rinpoche. And yeah, here's our shrine. And maybe Melanie, you can tell them a little bit about when they came out and we filled this beautiful Buddha with all sorts of sacred items. And we have a list of those somewhere, and it's magical.
Yeah, we had that Buddha specially made, and inside are amazing prayers. And remember, Buddha is just a representation of what you've got inside. That's just an outside representation. My Buddhas are right at the top. You can't actually see them in my shrine, but there's our beautiful Buddha, and it's such a beautiful center. Go on, Lee.
Yeah, and this is our the main high seat for whenever our high lamas come out, and then lots more different pictures. A beautiful Akon
lots of picture on the wall, that Natalie and all the friends painted of all the sort of things. I don't know if you could show them all the paintings that we've got. Beautiful. Yeah.
So and then this is our main shrine room, and then going forward to better go into the dark here. I'm just gonna switch on, and this is the rest of the room. It's a bit piled up with all the extra seating that we've got over here, but yeah, here's a beautiful painting.
She did all those on the wall, Natalie and all her friends, and she's the one that's had this picture made for me in Nepal, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, all sorts of beautiful details.
All the paintings on the walls, beautiful painting. So it's just nice for us to see, if you look up at all the paintings she's got. It's such a beautiful shrine room, and it's quite sad now with COVID that we don't really use it, or we're hardly there. But never mind. we'll get there eventually, I suppose, which is lovely. So tonight, I'm going to do now what really is the purpose of life, part 2. And I think it's really important tonight. Please ask your questions, please butt in, please do whatever you need to do. Because for me, I saw yesterday morning, there were a lot of people, and I really saw that people need to ask their own questions about things when you're going through now really what is the purpose of life. So I think that's very important. So I'm going to start off with a story, which is quite a shock story, 2 stories, in fact. So a frail old man went to live with his son, daughter-in-law, and 4-year-old grandson. The old man's hands trembled, his eyesight blurred, and his step faltered. The family ate together at the table, but the elderly grandfather's shaky hands and failing sight made eating difficult. Peas rolled off the spoon onto the floor, and when he grasped the glass, milk spilt on the tablecloth. The son, and especially daughter-in-law, became irritated with the mess. "We must do something with Grandpa," said the son. "I've had enough of spilt milk, noisy eating, and food on the floor." So the husband and the wife set a small table in the corner of the room, and there Grandpa ate alone while the rest of the family enjoyed their dinner. Since Grandpa had broken a dish or two, his food was served in a wooden bowl. When the family glanced in Grandpa's direction, sometimes he had a tear in his eye as he sat alone. Still, the only words the couple had for him were sharp admonition when he dropped his fork or spilt food. And the 4-year-old watched this in absolute silence. Okay. And one evening before supper, the father noticed his son playing with wood scraps on the floor. He asked the child sweetly, "What are you making?" Just as sweetly, the son replied, "Oh, I am making a little wooden bowl for you and Mom to eat your food in when I grow up." The 4-year-old smiled and went on with his work. The words so struck the parents that they were speechless. Then tears started to stream down their cheeks. Though no words were spoken, both knew what must be done. That evening, the husband took the grandfather's hand and gently led him to the family table. For the remainder of his days, he ate every meal with the family. For some reason, neither the husband or wife seemed to care any longer when a fork dropped, milk spilled, or the tablecloth soiled. So it's called "What goes around comes around," which is part of our suffering, because if we really understand, what I was saying last week is that the Buddha taught only 2 things: suffering and the end of suffering. That was all. And I think if you look at some of these stories, you'll really see what it's all about. And then this next story was a personal story written to me by the mother who experienced this story. And she said, "I would love you to," it was a long time ago, but she said, "I would love you to teach this to people because it's such a wonderful story." So this is her story. Our younger daughter, Diane, became ill at the age of 14 and passed on. We were devastated. Fortunately, I did understand spirituality and did accept her passing with a gratitude for the short time she was on loan to us. 3 weeks after her passing, Diane came to me in a dream. It was so vivid and real. She told me not to be sad as she had to move on, and because she had a very important job she had to do. She told me that she wouldn't see me for many years as she was going to study. And with that, I woke up in tears and quite upset. Many years went by, and Diane was always in our thoughts and remembered lovingly. 5 years ago, I had the most vivid dream. Diane came running into our bedroom, all dressed in a lovely pink dress. She looked beautiful. I stared at her in astonishment, asking her why she was now 5 years old when she'd left us at 14. She told me that she had taken rebirth and now lives with a family in Canada. and that she is teaching this family many lessons. In the same breath, she told me that she thought about me often, that she thought she would come and say hello. And with that, her arms went around me, hugging me very tightly, and I can still feel that hug to this day. Shortly after this dream, I began to write short stories about a little girl. I wrote about 30 stories and named the girl Shira. I naturally related my experience to my husband and to my older daughter living in America and shared my short stories with both of them. 3 years passed, and my daughter in America called me to tell me about a very strange experience she had had. She told me to sit down as she didn't want to give me a shock. She had attended a function of her friend's daughter, and the friend had told her about a good family friend of hers that was arriving from Canada for the occasion. The friend's name was Diane. This same woman, Diane from Canada, had come up to my daughter at the function to chat. My daughter asked her about her children. She said, I have a son of 18, a son of 15, and a little girl of 5 years old. She continued saying, I'm sure our daughter is very old soul who has reincarnated many times and has come to teach us many lessons already. My daughter sat up and asked her the daughter's name. She told me that it was no surprise when Diane answered Shira. The little girl's name was Shira. My daughter thought she would faint, and from that time on, she started her own spiritual pathway. She did not tell me the surnames of this family, as that was not the purpose of this divine knowledge. I can only say that for me, this experience is so wonderful. Now, that's a very interesting story, true story about a woman I was counseling and used to come to my groups who actually had that experience. And a lot of people say to me, but how come I don't have when I lost a child or whatever the case is? I think the reason that not only was she able to have the dream, and not only was she able to know where the child had taken rebirth, but I think the reason she could know this is that she could accept it. A lot of people might have, the temptation was so great to actually travel and go and see the child and see what it was. But she knew that wasn't the purpose in any way. The purpose was simply for her to learn the lesson and know that nothing is given to us. It's all temporary, it's all impermanent, and that suffering is part of our lives, but we can use it in a different way. I'll open up just now for you to ask your questions. And then I want to quote to you from the triple filter test. In ancient Greece, Socrates was reputed to hold knowledge in high esteem. One day, an acquaintance met the great philosopher and said, "Do you know what I just heard about your friend?" "Hold on a moment," Socrates replied. "Before telling me anything, I'd like you to pass a little test. It's called the triple filter test." Triple filter, that's right. Before you talk to me about my friend, it might be a good idea to take this triple filter test. The first filter is truth. Have you made absolutely sure that what you're about to tell me is true? "No," said the man. "Actually, I just heard about it and..." "All right," said Socrates, "so you don't really know if it's true or not. Now let's try the second filter, the filter of goodness. Is what you're about to tell me about my friend something good?" "No, on the contrary." "So," Socrates continued, "you want to tell me something bad about him. You're not certain it's true. You may pass the last test, though, because there's one filter left. The filter of usefulness." Usefulness. Is what you want to tell me about my friend going to be useful to me?" "No, not really." "Well," concluded Socrates, "if what you want to tell me is neither true nor good, nor even useful, why tell it to me at all?" Okay, now, that's a very good point, because if you look at our speech and that our speech goes through to the next incarnation, maybe a lot of us really need to look at that very carefully about what we say, what we talk to our friends about, and everything, because all of those make those imprints, those habitual imprints that in everything we do. And Tupton, our beloved monk who always comes to visit, and who hasn't been well at all for a very long time, he had COVID and has had long COVID, really long. I don't know how he is right now. I haven't spoken to him for a while. But he said, our biggest confusion is that we think happiness and suffering come from outside. We don't know how confused we are. If we don't know, we simply don't know. If we know that we don't know, then we are not confused. Our confusion means that we tend to view the world through a lens that is highly conditioned by our habits, our history, and we usually don't see things as they truly are. So I want to start with all of that, and I want to just give a very quick summary of what we spoke about last week, just a very quick summary. But I just want to say, we all agree that there's a lot of suffering in this world, especially now, and that it is necessary to get to the causes of suffering. As Namkhai Norbu said, you need to research the causes of suffering. You need to research them, especially when it's worldwide, like the coronavirus. It's really important that we ask the question, how did we get to this state? Why? Did we miss something? Was there something we never saw? It's so important to realize that at the time that life became dualistic, so we separated ourselves and the rest of the world was over there, where we believed in a solid me or I and others out there, we lost our common ground. We lost it. That's our important thing in all of the purpose of life. We lost our common ground, our essence, and things went from bad to worse. Suffering increased, and we forgot who we are and that we all have a common ground. And number one, we blamed outside forces for our suffering, God, people, the government, whatever else for our outside suffering. And two, we started to emphasize the human part of the mind, Sem, and our true natures, which were always there. We never had them foremost in our minds, only the human mind. So we have to see the purpose as getting back to the perfect expression, not of the human part of our mind. The human part is part of the nature of mind, but as the perfect expression of our nature of mind. And hello to coronavirus, because it's a great opportunity to take time out of the distracted activities we were really busy with all the time. And if we have hectic problems, we're busy sorting them out, but so many people who may be going through an okay time still feel a certain sense deep down isn't there something more than this? I mean, if you switch on the television and if you switch on the different news channels, you have to ask the question, isn't there a little bit more than this? And a sense of yearning for something. And when I was writing this, I thought to myself, I remember when I was a child, and sometimes when I was at home as a little girl, I used to actually think to myself, I'm homesick. But then I used to say to myself, and I remember this very clearly, it's so strange that I'm homesick when I'm at home. I mean, I'm at home. This is my home. I don't want to be anywhere else, but why am I homesick? I felt that homesickness at a very, very young age. And that yearning somewhere inside me, I didn't notice it so much until a little bit later on in my life. But it was all the stuff we've already got that we are trying to bring back again. So the Buddha taught about suffering and the end of suffering. And last week we were talking about the relative view at the bottom of the mountain, where we can only see it through our karmic vision, through our distortions, through our judgments, and the ultimate view, which is the way really things are. And if you wake up to that ultimate view, you are able to see not through the lens of your own judgments, your own everything. And I said last week that suffering is 4 things in this world. It's failure to get what we want. It's getting what we don't want. It's protecting what we have. And it's losing what we have. Just think of those 4 human things in this desire realm and how much it is, how much we just go through this all the time, all the time, all the time. It's everything in our lives. And I was saying last week, which is very important, is that the actual relative view of life is interdependent. So it's based on causes and effects. When all the causes and conditions come together, something happens. But nothing can happen with what wasn't interdependent. So when we look at things that are interdependent, they do not stand on their own with their own selves. They're dependent on all the causes that came before, and those things will then cause other things in the future. Whereas your nature of mind, which we call emptiness, and in fact, all the things in the interdependent life are empty, but when we call emptiness, we call it empty of a separate existence. In other words, it's empty of an independent, separate existence. The only thing that has an independent, separate existence is your nature of mind, your Buddha nature, your awakened nature, whatever you want to call it. Everything else is dependent on a million causes that actually come together. And when we look at that, we have to say that everything is impermanent. So why are we not looking in the purpose of life to go where it is permanent? So last week I was telling you, Sem is the human intellectual conditioned part of the mind. Sem Ni is the nature of mind, which has total awareness, total luminosity, total clarity. You can understand things in one glance. That's what the Buddha taught, and never affected by anything. And when we look at that, it's so interesting, because in one of the books that I was studying, it said that the great perfection teaching distinguishes between Sem and Sem Ni. And we can also call Sem Ni Rikpa, total awareness. Okay, now what the analogy was given here, which is so fascinating, is that Sem is like water, and Rikpa is like mercury. Such an interesting analogy, because your perceived objects, your sense organs, and your perceiving frame of mind are like dirt. And when you use your Sem, it pours water over the dirt and you've got mud. But when you use Rikpa, like mercury, it just runs off the dirt. It separates itself from the dirt. It doesn't take on the dirt, and it doesn't mix with the dirt. Now, why is that analogy given? What are we supposed to learn from that? Can anyone tell me, what do we learn from that? That if it doesn't mix with all the garbage, it stays clear all the time, then what are we doing in our purpose of life? Anyone tell me?
So now the pure nature of mind is untainted, so
Thank
it doesn't have any of that relative garbage and stuff.
Exactly. So what do you conclude if you're going through a terribly lot of suffering and everything, and you're using your human part of your mind to analyze it, to feel sorry for yourself, to find someone to blame, to do all of those kind of things, it's exactly like water mixing with the dirt.
Yeah.
It just becomes muddy.
Yeah, definitely.
But that nature of mind, no matter what you do, even if you murder people, that nature of mind does not get tainted. It's pure. It never mixes with all the garbage. And I think that's one of the most important things that you could ever get, because it really is an important thing, that. So when we look at it and we look at the story of the historical Buddha, which we're going to do after we've meditated, I'm just going to open it for you. We were just talking last time that Buddha Shakyamuni, who was the fourth Buddha of 1,000 or 1,004 Buddhas that will come in this era, and then their teachings last for a long time, okay, he was already enlightened, but he staged a historical event so that we would have the footprints to follow. And in each age, there's a being whose footprints follow the same aspects of the story so that we can wake up and learn. But what I said last week is that the difference between a Buddha, someone who is awakened, it's not a statue, someone who's awakened, and a sentient being, someone who's wandering around in this wheel of life, okay, is that the Buddha is aware of his nature, and the sentient being is unaware and deluded and wanders in samsara. That's the difference. There's actually no difference other than the one's aware and the one is unaware. Isn't that the most fantastic thing when you really look at that? I mean, it's really an amazing thing. And so what I want to do is I want to give you the story and put it into the suffering so that all of you can really understand it in terms of yourselves. But let me just stop for a moment and ask if anybody wants to ask a question or a comment or anything. Please do. Just unmute yourselves and please do.
Yeah, Mel, I think it's wonderful what you're talking about, because it just reminds me so much of the concept of reality versus perception. And I try to focus on that so much in my life, is to just keep telling myself there is no reality, there's only perception. And then just awareness around that helps you to figure out, and that whatever happens to you in life is because of the choices that you've made. It's your choice. Every single thing you do is your choice. And that it's just what you're talking about now is just sort of igniting that in me again.
I'm so glad, Henry. I'm so glad it's igniting, because it's so important. And it takes us a long time to get there, because we forget. We quickly go back to our earthly activities, which go on and on and on, and we quickly forget about it. And it's so important to actually really understand this and absorb it and practice it. Because when the Buddha, when Prince Siddhartha, he was born as a human being, but as I said last time, he didn't have to get born through parents. He could have just emanated bodies, as many bodies as he wanted. He was enlightened, but he didn't, especially so we could identify with that. That was the whole purpose, And when he was born, it was very interesting, because I think the prophecy at his birth is exactly our own prophecies, every one of us. So at birth, the prophecy was, the prophet came forward and he said, either he will become an incredible leader of beings and kingdoms, or he will become a holy man and teach all beings the paths to awakening. That's his choice. And his father thinks, oh boy, I need him to be a ruler. I need him to take over after me. So I'll give him everything that he needs, every single thing. And I'll close in these palace walls, and he'll be so happy and never know about holy men. I won't let any holy men in to get hold of him. But he did that. But then in the story of Prince Siddhartha, you see that he sits in the garden very often under a tree. And you could see he's pondering things. And inside him is a yearning for something else. And he says to himself, but I've got everything I need, everything. I've absolutely, eventually he marries a beautiful woman. He's got everything that you could desire, from wealth to education to whatever he wanted. Beautiful dancing woman, a magnificent palace, as much food as he wanted. But he sat under the tree and yearned. Now I want to take this to our own yearning that I started off with, because very, very often people's lives are going well. They're okay. Their relationships are okay. Most times they're not, but sometimes we go through quite a nice time and things are going well and we've got all the things we need and so on and so forth. But there's a feeling inside of not enough. There's something else in the world. And I have so many people. Someone texted me the other day and said that she wanted an appointment. And I wrote back and said, just give me a very brief summary of what you're wanting. And she says, I've got what I need in life, but I feel as though I'm slipping away from life. There's something that isn't there, that isn't functioning, that isn't total. And someone told me that I should come and see you and find that out. Now that's such an interesting thing, because how often do we feel that yearning, but then we've got so many things to do. We've got so many places to go. We've got so much work to do. We've got so many activities to do. So we kind of push it away. And sometimes, to some degree, we mix that yearning with a desire for things, a different life. I'd like to be like this person. I'd like to emulate that person. I'd like to, we constantly have yearning, but we don't identify that yearning, okay? And I think when you look at people in retirement, such an interesting thing, because any single person that comes to me when they're about to retire, I go, how divine. They go, no, I'm rather scared. I need to fill my days up. What am I going to do with long days and nights if I'm not working anymore? And I go, don't fill your day up. Allow that feeling of what it's all about. What am I doing here? Allow it to come up in you. And then immediately you allow it. You'll find the way, you'll find the person, you'll find the path that you need, because that is primary and tantamount in our lives. And so Buddhist, so Prince Siddhartha, okay, really could not find satisfaction in all these things that he was given. And he slips out of the palace gates and he sees suffering for the first time. Old age, sickness, death. He sees all of this. And unlike us, he sees it with the common ground. He says, this suffering, I can't, like a lot of us say, this is terrible what's happening here. And this is terrible what's happening there, but I'm okay kind of thing. We separate ourselves from the suffering, but he couldn't separate himself from it. And he really, 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 we have to ask the question, when is it enough? That's Tai Situ's question to us every single time. He says, when is enough enough? I once had a couple where the husband said, where the wife said, you promised me that when you made X amount of money, you'd stop so we could have you and you would give up a lot of this and you'd be at home more. And then he goes, yeah, but you know, things have changed a bit. And, you know, I mean, I have reached that goal, but now I've got a higher goal. You know, this is what we do with ourselves. There's always a higher goal. You can laugh, but it's absolutely true. Okay. And so Prince Siddhartha decides to leave the palace in disguise, much to his father's great anguish and everything else. And it's a long road when he leaves, because how far does he go? How far does he take it? And what I wanted to say, when we have to find that purpose, when we retire, that's when we really look at it very deeply. And we have to look at the Western philosophy, which says, don't sit there, do something. And the Eastern philosophy, which says, don't do anything, sit there. We find it very hard to sit. Do you know why we find it hard? Because such a lot of garbage comes up. Most people find it so hard to be alone, so hard to sit without anything to do. Someone said to me the other day, I can't meditate. I said, and what do you see as meditation? No, you have to still your mind. You have to stop thoughts. You have to do all of that. I said, you don't, you know. You just have to stop attaching and seeing things as tangible and analyzing them. So let's do a little meditation, but let me ask if anybody wants to say something. Ask anything, say anything, hold your peace. Anyone?
Well, Mel, what do you suggest if we're trying to create that in our life? So we're trying to create a balance of the responsibility and making the money to pay the bills and seeing that as a job, but with a bit of a purpose to it. And then having a balance to create more time to do spiritual practice. How do you create that? Because that's my goal at the moment.
I just want to, it's so good what you said. I can't find this answer. I hope I can find it here, because I've got a very good master's answer on that exact thing, but I don't know where it is. Just let me look in the beginning. If I don't find it quick, then I'll leave it. It's such an important thing, but I've got so many papers here for all of you. I just want to see if I can find it quick, because it's such a beautiful answer. But I may not have it right here. Okay. Anyway,
I'm in the process of manifesting it. I'm putting it out there.
That you want to have more time and space. Listen, I think it's wonderful. And the point is, we never really get to have that except in retirement. And I'm saying to you, like, no, I mean, I'm saying to you that it's such an important thing what you're asking. This was a beautiful quote, and I can't find it, about that there's never an end to your earthly activities. It came in such a beautiful form. Unfortunately, I'll find it and give it to you next time. But it said there's never an end to your earthly activities. So the bottom line is, if you're a busy person, you've got to set at least some time before you go into your busy life and sometime after your busy life to find that nature of mind, to clean yourself up and allow that nature of mind to happen. Not all of us are going to go into the mountains and be alone for the rest of our life. That's too scary for us. But we certainly have to give a little bit of time. Like I said last week, your 5-minute meditation sessions through the day. If you do 3 5-minute meditations, that's at least a start to find that rigpa, that intrinsic awareness, that waking up to that beautiful nature. I really think, and I think it's wonderful that you've actually set the goal, Kath, to have a job that's less days a week. You know, most people are too scared to do that because bosses don't want to hear your things of, I'd like to work 4 days a week, I'd like to work 3 days a week. But the bottom line is, if you yearn enough, it'll happen in time. It may not happen right now when you want it, but it will happen in time. But there's never an end to earthly activities. I can't believe that every day my life is full up, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing, there's still an abundance of activities, things to answer, and all of that. That's how the life is. But every morning for 2 hours, I'm in this room. And that's my time to really dedicate to that. And that I'll never give up. Never, never. It's very important to me, because when I give that up, I can't be of any value to anyone else. Any other comments or questions?
Isn't it also maybe not to see it so separate from each other?
Yeah.
I mean,
I like
I mean, you can practice in your daily activity.
exactly.
You can bring the practice into your day by trying to be aware, or do whatever 3-minute meditations in between, or all those kinds of things. Being mindful.
Okay, but you know what? I absolutely agree with you. But for the majority of people, that's a very difficult thing, because we can't separate. We can't actually acquire that ability to do it. So you have to train a little bit away from your daily activities. I mean, if you take someone like Akon Rinpoche, he never meditated. You never saw him sitting in meditation. He was in a total state of meditation 24/7. He never needed to sleep. He always knew exactly what was going on everywhere. But that comes after a lot of practice in a lot of lifetimes. So, you know, I think it is very important that you do it in your daily life. But I think it's really important to, in the beginning, to at least take a little bit of time in the early morning when you get up to actually do some meditation at least. And the foundational practices, which are really easy to do and which I can teach anybody to do. I think it really helps a lot to start cleaning up and allowing that rigpa to blossom within you, so that you can get a different perspective and a different purpose. So let's do a little meditation, and then we go on to the Buddha's actual teaching, which is really important. So get your posture. Your legs are in a half lotus or one in front of another in a cross-legged position. Your hands are on your lap, right over left, with the thumbs touching. Your shoulders are back. Your tongue is at the top of your palate. Your neck's a little bit tucked in, and your eyes are open. Don't close your eyes, because your eyes are the gateways to everything. And we start with that beautiful focus of breathing in and out, and in and out. And I want you to consider that all your feelings are made up of the same essence as your true nature. It's just we who give them solidity. We analyze them, we build on them. But if we just allow them to be, they just go back into the ocean of your essence. So the important thing is not clearing the mind. We're not here to clear the mind. We're human. We have lots of feelings and lots of thoughts. And they're not a problem. Because if you could see them, they're just made out of the same substance as the essence. And we just allow them to be. And when we realize that we are distracted and we are going after them, we just bring the mind back to the breath. And we breathe in and out, and in and out. And open yourself to the spaciousness of your true nature of mind. There is space in that for everything, providing we don't go after it, attach to it, build on it, analyze it, try to get rid of it. Just let it be. And feel that beautiful peace coming back into the breathing in and out. Just being present, being awake, being aware. So let's go to what the Buddha taught, okay? He went out of the palace, he went to the one extreme of total renunciation. Then he said there's got to be a middle road. And finally, he actually discovered what life was about. And Thich Nhat Hanh writes it so beautifully. I'm not going to give it all. I'm just going to give you a little bit. He saw the Buddha when he became enlightened, how countless beings passed through countless births and deaths in countless worlds and universe. He saw that they suffer because they don't understand that all beings share a common ground. That's what he said. And he said it was so important that we did. And I think the story of the salt child is such a beautiful story to explain this. There was once a child made all of salt who very much wanted to know where he had come from. So he set out on a long journey and traveled to many lands in pursuit of this understanding. Finally, he came to the shore of the great ocean. How marvelous, he cried, and stuck one foot in the water. The ocean beckoned him further, saying, if you wish to know who you are, do not be afraid. The salt child walked further and further into the water, dissolving with each step, and at the end exclaimed, ah, now I know who I am. Now we're like that salt child. When we walk into the essence just absorbs us in, and then we know who we are. And the Buddha saw that ignorance and fear makes us separate into you and me, duality. And all negative emotions he saw at that moment have their root in ignorance and delusion. And understanding the truth, dissolving suffering, confusion, and sorrow from the peak of his enlightenment. He had insight into everyone's mind at every level. He felt as though a prison that had confined him for thousands of lifetimes had been broken open. Ignorance was the jail keeper. And that's how he saw how people on the wheel of life just keep going and keep going and keep going. And the past karma comes flowing into the next life that we created. And Padampa Sanjay, a Chur master, don't worry about that now, he was a great master. He said, it's not circumstances that arise as one's karmic vision that condition you into your dualistic state. That's not what makes you into this person who's in duality. It's a person's own attachment that enables what arises to condition him. So it doesn't make any difference what your circumstances are. You can be a prince, you can be a king, you can be wealthy, you can be poor, you can be a beggar. It does not matter in any way what you are. Okay, that is absolutely nothing. But if we use that vital tool of awareness, known in Tibetan as Rigpa, you could wake up and you could go past it. And he said, what was so interesting is, how am I going to teach this? What happens? How am I going to teach people to understand the suffering, which he said, but he knew at that point that he had found the great way. Now his heart experienced peace and ease, and all the pain was gone. And he would never again experience disappointment and suffering, nor be waylaid by any causes or conditions. His mind was beyond them. But then his problem was, how do I teach this? How do I give this to people? Whatever I say, they're not going to understand. And so he said, after he got enlightened, I discovered something profound and luminous beyond all concepts, all circumstances, all causes and conditions and effects. I tried to communicate it with words, but nobody understands. So now I'll meditate alone in the forest. So people begged him. Now, what I want to say is, what's very, very important is he realized it's absolutely no good me teaching people about suffering and saying, don't do this because this causes suffering. Don't do that because that causes, because they won't listen. He said, I've just got to talk about suffering. If I talk about suffering, when everyone's engaged, I will use my Vajra speech to teach them about suffering, then they'll want to know. But how do we get rid of this suffering? Where did it come from? How can we research the causes? Now, when you learn the Four Noble Truths, a lot of people who've been in Buddhism, it's one of the first teachings you learn. And that's absolutely fine. But when you look at the Four Noble Truths, every time I teach them in a completely different way. And you must ponder them in a completely different way. You mustn't say, I know the Four Noble Truths, there's nothing I can really, nothing more. Every time you read those Four Noble Truths, you learn something different because you see it from a higher and higher point of view on the mountain. And he said, I've got to teach 2 effects and then 2 causes, not 2 causes and then 2 effects. They won't listen to me. And I think Minja Dorje put the Four Noble Truths in a beautiful way because he called them the 4 insights into the way things are. Now I'm going to open them up for all of you to really talk about them, because let me just give you the 4 and then we're coming back to really discuss them. Okay. So the first thing the Buddha said was, life is suffering, but Minja Dorje didn't put it like that. He said the first noble truth was ordinary life. So the life you're leading is conditioned by suffering. Do you agree or not? Ordinary life is conditioned by suffering. What would you say if somebody said to you, ordinary life's conditioned by suffering? Would you agree or disagree? You may go, no, but I've got a few nice things in my life that I like. I've got a few enjoyable things. No, I don't think that ordinary life's conditioned by suffering. I've had that argument from people a lot. They go, no. There are lots of nice things. So why did the Buddha teach ordinary life is conditioned by suffering? Why did he teach that as the first noble truth? It's so important that you ponder this yourself, not say, oh, this is beginner's material, I won't do it. Because if you get this, then you can get the purpose of life. So why do you think this wise, enlightened being, when he didn't know what to teach and he used Vajra speech means if he had 5,000 people, each one could hear it at their own level. Amazing, Emaho. So what did he mean when he said ordinary life is conditioned by suffering? Anyone?
Melanie, I'll come in there just to say that, yeah, I was one of those people when someone first told me the first noble truth about life is suffering. I was like shocked, and I was actually quite annoyed that someone would like have that attitude of like, yeah, this is all. And I also thought, yeah, I've had a great life, but I mean, I was in a therapist's office, so I guess it wasn't all that great. So it was, there was all that suffering there. But I like to put that word satisfaction as suffering as dissatisfaction. I've always much preferred it to suffering, because we think of suffering as pain or this kind of thing. So that dissatisfaction is in everyday things. If we have this car, we're thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind a faster car. If we have this, we're never satisfied. And we always are looking for more. And if we've got, that's a kind of dissatisfaction that treats life. Oh, the weather today is too hot, too cold, not this, not that. And that's the dissatisfaction we're going through every day.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, call it dissatisfaction if you want. In Sanskrit, it's called dukkha, which actually the translation is suffering. And the Buddha taught about the word suffering. It's interesting because he said there are 3 types of suffering, which is so interesting. First of all, there's the suffering of suffering. Now, the suffering of suffering is a very interesting thing because, Robin, you going through the suffering of suffering in your life right now. It means you go through this and then you hit on that way and then you hit on that way and then you hit on that way. And it's more and more and more. Actually, when we're going through suffering of suffering, we should actually get down on our hands and knees and say, thank you, universe. Thank you. Thank you. You're making sure that the carpet's pulled off under my feet and that I never become complacent again. I mean, the suffering of suffering is the first type of suffering. The second type of suffering that he spoke about was the suffering of change. Now, if you look at the suffering of change, it's fascinating. The more I look at it, the more fascinated I become, because the suffering of change is, of course, your body's changing. Your career is changing. The way people respect you is changing. Your children are changing. These little children, even grandchildren that needed you and wanted you, they're changing. Now they're more interested in their own things. People who have careers, my husband gets so cross with me because he's sitting here, but he loved Frank Sinatra. And I said, yes, Frank Sinatra was a great talent in his day. But when he got into his 70s or 80s and he jumped down the stairs and you could see his double chin coming down the stairs, I was very upset about it, because I said, why don't you take your change and be graceful and bow out? You had such a talent, as a young man, because we all suffer. And if you look at film stars, most of them do all kinds of things to themselves so not to change. So everything in our lives is the suffering of change. We just keep changing all the time. And sometimes we want things to change, but often we suffer very greatly from change and from things becoming different and how they were. Okay. And the third type, which you can discuss with me, is called the suffering of conditioned existence. Now, that's the suffering you were talking about, Lee. Inherent in your life. Okay. This weather's too hot. I was counseling someone in Dubai, and I said to this child, what do you like about Dubai? She said, not the weather. Okay. So she said, it's so hot, we can't breathe. You have to sit in air conditioning all the time. So we don't like the weather. We don't like it when it's cold and rainy. The suffering of conditioned existence, all the things we do that come back to us, both good and bad, is called the suffering of conditioned existence. The bad is called the suffering. The good deeds obviously come around and really come back to us, but it's called the suffering of conditioned existence. So everything's changing, and when we've got this, we want that, and when we are this, we want that. It's called the suffering of conditioned existence. We always moaning and complaining because inherent in our life is that kind of suffering. Now it's very interesting, because when you set amazing causes into action, it's a completely different one. And this beautiful story really says it, where a British family journeyed to Scotland for a summer vacation. The mother and father were looking forward to enjoying the beautiful Scottish countryside with their young son. But one day the son wandered off all by himself and got into trouble. As he walked through the woods, he came across an abandoned swimming hole, and as most boys his age do, he took off his clothes and jumped in. He was totally unprepared for what happened next. Before he had time to enjoy the pool of water, he was seized by a vicious attack of cramps. He began calling for help while fighting a losing battle with the cramps to stay afloat. Luckily, it happened that in a nearby field, a farm boy was working. When he heard the frantic cries for help, he jumped in, rescued the English boy, and brought him to safety. The father, whose son had been rescued, was of course very grateful. The next day, he went to meet the youth who'd saved his son's life. As the two talked, the Englishman asked the brave lad what he planned to do with his future. The boy answered, "Oh, I suppose I'll be a farmer like my father." The grateful father said, "Well, is there something else you'd rather do?" Oh, yes, answered the Scottish lad. I've always wanted to be a doctor, but we are poor people. We could never afford to pay for my education. Never mind that, said the Englishman. You will have your heart's desire and study medicine. Make your plans and I'll take care of the costs. So the Scottish lad did indeed become a doctor, a very famous doctor. Some years later, in December of 1943, Winston Churchill became very ill with pneumonia while in North Africa. Word was sent to Sir Alexander Fleming, who had discovered the new wonder drug penicillin, to come immediately. Flying in from England, Dr. Fleming administered his new drug to the ailing Prime Minister. In doing so, he saved Churchill's life for the second time, because it was the boy, Winston Churchill, whom Alexander Fleming had rescued from the swimming hole so many years before. Amazing story, isn't it? Because really, for all of us, it is amazing that that goes around. But the suffering of conditioned existence is the opposite. It's actually when whatever you've put out comes back, and when it comes back, we are very in a different form, in a different way, not knowing. We are really very, very offended that we've got this, but it's our own creation. So that was the first noble truth. The second noble truth was suffering. Yes. Go on.
Before you go on to the second one, I think for me, life is suffering. I always think of it in terms of how everything is impermanent. I mean, that is a big issue. It's suffering, yes, but the suffering doesn't last.
Exactly.
You know, it passes. Just as much as you know, the slice of birthday cake doesn't last. It passes. So I mean, that's often, you know, that's kind of my view of suffering. I don't look at it as you know, an endless flagellation of one sort or another. I look at it as something, yes, that is how it is, but it will change.
Yeah. That's very, very good. But most people, when they're going through intense suffering, they know that it will end, but right now when they're in it, they can't actually, they can't understand.
That's true. Yeah, I do wallow from time to time.
Yeah, and the Buddha taught about contemplating on impermanence so that we would have that attitude, because it said that suffering is inherent in our lives, in our relative lives, but it results from the causes, the two causes, negative emotions and karma. So what you put out comes back to you. And what you put out is usually put out because of negative emotions. And negative emotions are those feelings we have when we really are resentful towards somebody else for what they've done and how they've done it. I mean, it's really important for us to actually understand this, because negative emotions are nothing like they seem to be. We just give them that value.
But isn't it also as simple as, if we don't realize that life is suffering, then there's nothing to be done. So you have to first accept that the suffering is there.
Exactly.
But if you don't see the suffering, how are you ever going to get out of samsara? You won't. You don't see that actually what is happening is suffering. And it doesn't mean that it happens to you every minute. But we realize that there is endless suffering in the world. I mean, Shenrezi wanted to end the suffering of all beings and broke into 1,000 pieces because he saw it's not ending.
And then what did he say? You see, but the way, the perspective of how he saw it was, it's not outside of me. You see, this is what the Buddha saw, that if we all belong to the same ground, then the suffering is not outside of us. So when you switch on the television program, you can't say, look how terrible it is in India. Look how terrible it is in Myanmar. Look how terrible it is. and switch off the television and go and have your meal and not think of the suffering anymore. That suffering is our suffering. We've created it. This coronavirus, I mean, I get so mad with people because at the moment I know a couple of families that are really going through this coronavirus, and it's horrific what they're going through. It's absolutely horrific. It really is terrible. But we have to feel that as part of ourselves. And Chamtrul Rinpoche said, if you fully understand karma at the deepest level, you will not only have compassion toward all beings who are presently suffering, but you will also have compassion toward all beings who are harming others as they are creating the causes for their own future suffering. And then he says, may all beings be free from suffering and its causes, which is what we do the prayer of.
Melanie, I just with the suffering, the story, you made reference to ordinary life. I just want to understand, what does that mean?
It means the life that we are leading as sentient beings, wandering in delusion, wandering in confusion on a relative level. But if we look at the real basic thing of it, it's just, we have our essence, which is our awakened nature, which is emptiness, which is spacious, which is everything. It has a nature, which is awareness, clarity, luminosity. And then it has, those two have unlimited energy. And if you hear the word, the energy plays out, it's such an important thing, because that Diane, is your actually thing of that it's all permanent. It's playing out. That's all it is. Now, when you understand that terminology, it's just the energy playing out. You start to have a different perspective, because the energy will play out and then it will come back to the essence. It has to, whether we're seeing it in its positive, pure way, or we're seeing it in a negative way, it will come back to the essence if we allow it to play out without going in and intervening and trying to make it different and resentful and using our negative emotions and suing people and doing all these kind of things. That's when the suffering goes on, because we're creating all the causes for future suffering. Now, the Buddha said, and next time we can really talk about those negative emotions, because if you could see negative emotions as they really are, you wouldn't see them that way. You'd see them that way as wisdoms and primordial wisdoms. The negative emotions are not true. And those negative emotions, we learn to liberate them. So when we're in a bad way, or we're angry, or we're resentful, or we're upset, or we hurt, or we're disappointed, we know that in the mirror primordial wisdom, that disappointment did not come from that other person. That disappointment's primary cause came from us. That's what the Buddha said. Two causes: our negative emotions and that which we set up in motion. Whatever we set up in motion comes back to us, absolutely, without a doubt. So we can never say in the causes of suffering, it was his fault. He did this to me. He caused this. She caused this. This government caused this. I lost everything. It's all your own stuff that you created. And if you let it play out, it will end. That's the point. Because the third noble truth, the Buddha said, there's a place where suffering can be extinguished. There's a place where suffering can be extinguished. Where is that place? Where can the suffering be extinguished? If we're not going to take the actual condition, but the Buddhists taught as his third noble truth, there's a place where suffering can be extinguished. What was he saying? Where's this place? Let's all go there. Get your cars. Let's go to this place where all suffering is extinguished. Let's all go and live there. Except it's not an external place. There are some places, but not external. But where can suffering be extinguished, Marcel? In that place called Rigpa, in that place called intrinsic awareness, there's an energy of it in your heart, not in your head, in your heart. And when you touch on that, it's the mercury that can never be tainted by your suffering. And the Buddha said there's a place where suffering can be extinguished. Amazing. And I know it. Sometimes when I'm really upset about something, and I come and I sit and I meditate and I kind of go just beyond my human mind, if I'm able to. There is a place where none of that exists, where I can actually perceive that all of that is playing out, that has really been upsetting for me today, is all going to disintegrate. It's all my own creation, and it's all made out of the same essence. And if I just let it be, it will play itself out, because the energy comes from the essence and its nature. And then once it's played out, it goes back into the essence. That's the principle, the spiritual nature. That's what it's all about. And when we can understand this, then it starts changing everything. And then he came to his fourth noble truth, which said, there's a simple path or pathways through which the causes of suffering can be extinguished. Now, when we come next time, I want to really show you how these four noble truths can be taken higher and higher and higher. It's absolutely amazing, because he taught them 3 times, going up, 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 until there really isn't anything there. When we perceive that, then we get the real purpose of life, which is absolutely amazing. So he said, there's a pathway. Here, I'm giving you all these tools. Go out, right thought, right livelihood, right meditation, right this. I'm giving you all these practices. Go and practice them to get to the place where suffering can be extinguished, because it can never be extinguished on a relative level. Because when this suffering is finished, that suffering is coming. So it's kind of like the beautiful blackbird, the story of the blackbird who found a large piece of food in the village and lit out into the sky with the food in its beak. A flock of his brothers chased after him and raucously attacked the food, pulling it from his beak. The blackbird finally let go of the last piece, and the frenzied flock just left him alone. The bird swooped and dived and thought, I've lost the food, but I've regained the peaceful sky. Now we need to regain that peaceful sky, but we need to give something up to regain that peaceful sky. I've got so many stories here for you, amazing stories that people have given me and everything, really amazing stories. But let me open this up, because that's not the end of the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are: ordinary life is conditioned by suffering. Suffering results from causes. There's a place where suffering can be extinguished, and there's a simple path which helps you to go on where suffering can be extinguished. Now just think about it. Every single thing that you're going through has been well earned by you, well created by you. You are the creator of it. There is nothing that you didn't create. There is nothing that comes into being that was not done by you, the creator. Scary. You all look very quiet, but that's good. Yeah, Rob, let's hear what you're thinking. You're looking very earnest. What are you thinking? Let's hear.
Yeah, it's always confusing because
There we
I
go.
think when you in the when you're in the midst of what you're saying, suffering,
Oh, Marcel. Marcel. Yes. Mute. Just hang on. I'm going to mute everybody so we don't have to hear what's going on in her poor house. But you carry on. You unmute yourself. But otherwise, we'll just mute everybody so we don't have to hear what everybody's doing. Okay, so carry on. Just unmute yourself.
Okay, I did. I think, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So kind of when the idea is that you the creator. So are you the creator of an incident or a loss, or because I think what you were saying the last time, there's so many levels of things that happen together and ultimately, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, what I did now created the loss of my daughter, or the death of my father, or the work that doesn't, I mean, that we could not live with. But because we cannot think that everything that happens to us is, I think it's maybe egotistical to think that it's your fault or not your fault, because
That's
it's
not
bigger
what I
than that. So
said. Stop. I never said it was your fault.
no, I know that.
Yeah, but what I wanted.
No, I realize that. But obviously, in a grief process, you incline to, that's one of the big difficulties is dealing with the guilt of, and I suppose that will be of whether it's death or loss or bankruptcy or whatever it is it's not fault, and I know what you're saying, but you incline to think of that way. And the first initial reaction to any disaster is what did I, why me? What did I do to deserve it? And part of what you're saying kind of thinks, well, if we created it, is it not our fault? And
Okay, but just stop right there. You see, when you look at any incident, it's not just tit for tat. In other words, it's not you hit somebody, you get a hit. Sometimes it is like that, especially when you have instant karma. Because if you're aware and you create karma, I know when I create hurt to anybody, like within that day, I already get a hit over my head, because I'm aware and I know what I'm doing, and I know if it's hurtful, I'll go straight away and apologize to the person or whatever the case is. But when you look at it, it's not tit for tat. But when you look at, say, a loss in your life, and you put all the causes and conditions together, that loss, in terms of what you are needing, you didn't cause the loss, but you were needing that loss in order to reach whatever you've got to reach at that time. So in that sense, You are the creator, not the creator of the person's death, but you are the creator of the circumstances of your own life, which means that somewhere, not that you caused their death, but somewhere you needed what comes out of that bereavement in your life. That's a very different way of rather saying, no, I caused this, I caused somebody to die. That's not the truth. Lots of conditions come together. Lots of causes and conditions come together to make it happen. But what you go through, you cause. Now just think about that. So what you go through, you're the creator of that somewhere way back, but don't look at it as I caused her death. No, 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 never. But you created things you needed to learn out of that situation. Can you understand what I'm trying to say? Maybe not.
I do, and I think yeah, that makes much more sense. And I think if I see how fundamentally people change after an event, and you have the choice, you can either the path is massively divergent. So you're either going to really do nothing with it and go completely broken negative, or you've got to create, and that's where you say it's created it's not necessarily what you want, but now that it's there, and you've said often it is what it is, and then you've got to make a decision. Are you going to strive to a higher purpose, or just let yourself go to and we do have that choice. It's our choice, and that's why
you choose the letting go and not following the journey, then you're going to have the suffering of suffering. You're going to be hit more because you haven't learned the lesson out of it. It's what you learn out of it. Unfortunately, that's why so many people, I'm watching a few people right now going through real suffering of suffering. And I hurt as much as them with the suffering they're going through, because I can see the mentality. It's really a horrible thing, but I can see what people are doing. But very often they don't want to hear what you're saying. They don't want to know. They don't want to listen because they're in the midst of it and they're not prepared to pull themselves out. They just want to be a miserable victim. And then what happens when you are a miserable victim is, unfortunately, it catapults because the imprint comes deeper. And so the circumstances become more urgent, unfortunately. But unfortunately, that's the way we've got to learn until we get to that point where the causes of suffering can be extinguished. So they aren't what we think they are. And that's what the Buddha was teaching. He said, there's so much suffering in the world, and I see so much suffering. Let's try and research the causes of the suffering. And I will do that with all of you, looking at the negative emotions and everything, because I think that's such an important thing. And that's what we have to do together. So I think let's end here. And then if anybody wants to ask me anything, you really are welcome. I'll stay a few minutes so that people can ask. But Kath, can we just do the dedication? We dedicate for all suffering sentient beings. May they really be free from creating the causes of suffering. May they learn what they have to go through. So let's do it in English. Through the virtue of this goodness, may I obtain omniscience and overcome all adversity, thereupon liberating beings from the ocean of existence, which is rocked by the waves of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Sunam die tamche zipane topne nepe dranam pamshene jega nachi balap topaye sipe sole doa do warsho. So I'm very happy to answer